Well, I would say it's probably more recognisable than we would first like to admit. The characters, the people, how they interact. I think we'd recognise a lot of Shakespeare's world if we were transported back to this place. And yet, of course, much has changed. I like the idea of going to the Globe and sort of fighting your way through harlots and bears and publicans. It's a bit like the South Bank now, but you get there and it's the smells, the noise, the crowds. I think it would be almost an overwhelming experience, and those actors would have to really assert themselves on the stage to be heard, to be noticed, to get the attention. It's one of the things that constantly amazes me is that a play like Hamlet, which is over 3.5 hours, he was able, as a writer, to transfix a mostly illiterate audience, packed in with all these competing other attractions like bear baiting and the inns and taverns and the prostitutes, and pack them in and hold them and captivate them when all this noise and smells were going on. So I think human nature hasn't fundamentally changed. We'd recognise a lot, but of course the physical surroundings has been transformed.
I think there's also this sense of excitement about the world expanding at Shakespeare's time. In the Elizabethan period, certainly the latter part of it, was the time of discovery. Sailors were setting off, Sir Francis Drake had circumnavigated the globe, and that comes into his plays, I think, the sense of the world beyond in the work Merchant of Venice, for example,
and
The Tempest. So I think there's that's very much that sense of space that you were talking about in the theatre, but there's also the world beyond, which is opening up, and certainly many of the inhabitants of London would be aware of that.
I think arguably one of the big differences is that it was a time of threat as well, whether that was political threat. There's references in Macbeth to the change in monarchy, the change from the Tudors to the Stuarts, and that uncertainty that brought to the life and times of Shakespeare. There's also the constant presence of death, which is very different from our own time, and of course the advances in medicine have kind of moved that away from the kind of the everyday, and yet for Shakespeare death is a constant in his plays, and also for him personally, with his children, which is referenced in some of the plays. So it's slight differences, which we sometimes maybe are not quite aware of, and it was also quite a dangerous time with people's religions being compromised or being an intolerant time, which is different from our own.
But also quite similar as well.
Indeed, yeah. And I wonder whether sometimes in different cultures around the world today, that the plays perhaps are more resonant, or at different times, at different. There's that great example where Richard III is compared to kind of the rise of Hitler in McKellen's interpretation, where we can kind of map those experiences of the past on kind of modern day alternatives.